So I thank you all for coming today. We're not really accustomed to doing this here. You kind of got to be a sheriff to know how to run a press conference. So luckily, Sheriff Del Toro assisted us with this. And so on behalf of myself and Mirtha, I want to thank you all for being here today. So it was January 18th of 1991. Fort Pierce police officer Danny Parish was about a week away from deploying to the Middle East to the first Gulf War, Desert Storm. On that day, he woke up like he did every other day and prepared to go to work. He put on his uniform, he put his badge over his heart, he strapped on his gun belt, he kissed his beautiful wife, Mirtha, and he stepped out the door at 29 years old into eternity. See, Danny knew when he woke up that day, just like every other man and woman in law enforcement across this nation, that this could be the day he meets the wolf. This could be the day where he's called upon to stand in the breach, to protect his fellow citizens, to protect people he doesn't know. But Danny did that willingly, of his own free will. Later that evening, during a routine traffic stop, and I use that term in quotes because a friend of mine, an old FHP captain many, many years ago, soon to be the Indian River County Sheriff, told me there is no such thing as a routine traffic stop in law enforcement. As a young prosecutor, I had no idea what he meant by that. 35 years later, I know only too well what that means. You see, Danny was just on patrol. And there's a car going the wrong way in a one-way street. No big deal. Somebody's going to get a ticket tonight. Or maybe somebody gets a warning. But you see, on that day, at that time, here in our circuit, Danny came upon a wolf. That wolf has a name. His name was Billy Leon Kearse. What Danny didn't know is that Billy Kearse had just gotten out of prison. In fact, Mirtha informed me today that he was in on a 4-year sentence and was released after 8 months. Great system. And he was on parole. And of course, given that status, he had some concern that his interaction with law enforcement could potentially cause him some problems. Danny didn't know this. Danny was probably just going to give him a warning, send him on his way. But he refused to cooperate. He refused to provide information. He refused to follow lawful orders. And as a result of that, Danny had to go hands-on. And Kearse resisted. And he fought him. And guess what? He wasn't armed. He wasn't armed until he took Danny's firearm and fired a round underneath his vest into his chest as Danny fell to the ground. His life oozing from his body, Kearse stood over him with Danny's firearm. As Danny laid on the ground, begging for his life, he fired 13 more rounds into him. In an act of self-serving interest, in an effort to avoid the consequences of driving maybe on a suspended license or being out after curfew or what the case might be, he chose to take a life. Danny did nothing but his job. Later at trial, I was talking to Mirtha earlier at one of his trials. When he took the stand, he was asked about whether or not he thought Danny was going to give him a warning. And he said, yeah, he said he was going to give me a warning, but I didn't believe the pig. Not the police officer, not the son, not the husband, not the brother, but the pig. Now, let's make no mistake about it. We're not here today talking about somebody for whom there is a claim of innocence. Billy Leon Kearse, in cold blood, premeditatedly and calculatedly executed a law enforcement officer here in this circuit. And so, you know, Mirtha, Danny's wife of 10 years, his parents, once the shock of his murder wore off, the real nightmare began for them. because then the case proceeded through the criminal justice system. The case was handled by this office by my predecessor, Bruce Colton, who personally prosecuted the case alongside David Morgan, his chief assistant at the time, and Lawrence Merman, all three of whom now, incidentally, are retired. They worked diligently and tirelessly on this case. The case went to trial in 1991. There was a verdict and a recommendation of death. 12 citizens making those findings. The case went to the Florida Supreme Court. It was reversed for a resentencing. The case came back. We tried that case again. Bruce Colton, Lawrence Merman, a jury of 12 citizens found the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt and determined that he warranted the death penalty in a 12-0 recommendation. That case was then appealed directly to the Florida Supreme Court. The Florida Supreme Court denied that appeal. The case came back to the trial court, where Mirtha and Danny's family were dragged into the courtroom again, where the defendant could then challenge the quality of his representation, the representation we provided him. He lost that motion. That motion was then appealed directly to the Florida Supreme Court, where again he lost. The case then comes back, and guess what? They started all over again. They went through the federal court system, and they challenged the conviction, and they challenged the quality representation. It went to the Circuit Court of Appeals. It went to the Federal District Court of Appeals. It went to the United States Supreme Court, and his appeals were denied. Ladies and gentlemen, this case went before the Florida Supreme Court no fewer than 11 times, before the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta 3 times, and before the United States Supreme Court another 3 times. That's the nightmare suffered by Mirtha. And perhaps mercifully, Danny's parents didn't have to suffer through that whole thing, because guess what? Kearse outlasted them. So on June 24th of 2024, I get a call from my chief investigator, Nora Pfeiffer, and she says, Danny's wife would like to talk to you, Mirtha Busbin. And I'd met Mirtha on occasion, but just in passing. And she said, he'd like to come and talk to you about Danny's case. And I said, of course, come immediately. And we sat down, and she told me the story I knew in large part, but not the tragedy of some of the facts that I've just discussed with you. And she said to me, will you help me? Will you help me reach out to the governor's office? His appeals are done. This case is final. It is at repose. We should now move to the final step. And I said, absolutely. I'll do whatever I can. And so Mirtha and I both wrote letters to our governor, and we shipped those letters off. And here, yesterday, we hear from Governor DeSantis, who, let me be very clear when I say this, had the moral courage to abide by the oath he took to protect, to defend, and to enforce the laws of the state of Florida. And so we're here today only because he has faithfully executed the laws, and he has brought this case to its almost final conclusion. And so I personally, on behalf of myself, want to thank Governor DeSantis. I also want to thank his general counsel, Ryan Newman, and of course I want to thank our Attorney General, General Uthmeyer, who has been instrumental as I've communicated with all of them on the phone over the last several months in an effort to get to where we are today. So now we stand on the verge of the termination of this proceeding. We are 32 days away. 32 days away. And I would love to stand here before you today and say it on March 3rd of this year at 6 p.m. this nightmare will come to an end. But I can't. But I will tell you that the Attorney General has committed the resources of his office fully and completely, and as have I, to see this through the end. It's going to be fast. It'll be furious. There will be motions upon motions filed in this case, but we will litigate them. Mr. Kearse will get a 12th trip to the Florida Supreme Court and a 4th trip to the United States Supreme Court, but we're confident. We're confident at this stage that we are close to the end. And so I say for the last 35 years, Mirtha she has been the paragon of patience and rectitude. She has stood for Danny. Many of us went about our business. Unfortunately, other law enforcement officers died. Unfortunately, other citizens have lost their lives. Law enforcement has continued to stand in the breach. This office has continued to prosecute, but there stood Mirtha, not giving up, not forgetting, keeping up the pressure. So I'm going to say, for Danny and to you, I'm sorry. I am so sorry that this criminal justice system, this broken, dysfunctional criminal justice system, would take us 35 years to get to where we are today. You stood with us at all times. You pressed us, you pushed us to do the right thing. God willing, on March 3rd of this year, your nightmare will come to an end. So I have some closing comments after Mirtha and the chief have spoken, but I know you wanted to say some things.
Thank you, Tom Backadall. I couldn't have told the story any better other than I've lived it for 35 years like it's happened yesterday. And all I can say is fight. Keep fighting. If this happens to a loved one of yours or you have a family member that's gone through something like this, keep fighting. There will be justice served. And just like this, it's been long, long, long overdue. I was hoping his parents would have got closure from it and the rest of his family, but he has nobody left but his sister and me. And I honestly could not have done it without the backing up of our state attorney, Tom Backadall, Sheriff Richard Del Toro, that helped me put a letter together, his best buddy, Captain Greg Kirk, who submitted a letter, his sister, Danny Parish, who sent a letter, and I did a letter, and I'm so thankful, and I owe them so much. And thank you to Governor Ron DeSantis for signing and listening to the pain and the story of how it took place. And thank y'all for keeping him alive all these years and sharing my story.
Chief.
So I apologize, I'm not quite as eloquent as Tom Backadall, but on behalf of the Fort Pierce Police Department and the officers at our department, I would like to read this to you. Today we pause to remember Sergeant Danny Parish and acknowledge a measure of justice that has taken more than 30 years to reach. Sergeant Parish was taken from us on January 18th, 1991. His loss was and is still deeply felt by the members of the Fort Pierce Police Department. His name is inscribed on the rear of every badge that our officers wear. While nothing can undo the loss of Sergeant Parish, this moment represents justice finally being served. His sacrifice was not forgotten, and his life and service continue to matter. We honor Sergeant Parish's legacy and remain committed to the values he upheld: service, courage, and dedication to protecting others. And I want to implore the media. You know, we always discuss about how these officers died or where we were when we heard the news. Talk about these men and women when they lose their lives as how they lived. They were much more than the uniform. They were much more than the badge. They were worth much more than that to all of us. Thank you.
So if you just indulge me, I just have a closing comment that we'll take questions, just some final thoughts. You know, you turn on the TV today, or you go online, or whatever source of media that you might rely upon to get your news, and you see what's transpiring across this nation. You see the chaos, the havoc that's being wrought upon our cities. You see people who are misinformed and misguided in their interaction with law enforcement, and how their actions strike at the very foundation or heart of a government that is based upon the rule of law, and that they take guidance from officials, elected public officials, that is clearly and certainly irresponsible as it calls into question what they could possibly be thinking as it relates to people's interaction with law enforcement. You know, as I told you earlier, Danny confronted the wolf. Let's take a breath. Let's take a deep breath and let's reflect just for 1 minute. When you're home and the wolf's at your door, and it's your life that's in danger, or the lives of your loved ones, who is going to come to your aid? The governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz? The mayor of Minneapolis, Fry? No, Danny is coming to your door. Danny and the men and women in law enforcement who every day step across that same threshold Danny crossed, knowing that today could be my day, yet they willingly take that step. You know, what's really ironic to me is had Danny gone to the Gulf and been in the battlefield in Kuwait, he most likely was safer there than he was here protecting us in Fort Pierce. That's irony. So we'll take questions if you all have any questions.
After the last appeal was denied, why do you still think that it took letters from both of you to finally get this death warrant signed?
You know, I don't know. I can't answer that question. There are a significant number of cases that are on death row. The legal proceedings, the machinations that occur during the life of one of these cases is, I've given you an example. So I know that our governor is a law and order governor who believes in and supports law enforcement. And what he sees here, and we've got another one that I'm already reaching out to the governor on in Indian River County, in William Reeves. I think he takes priority in that. I think he recognizes the importance of standing up for the men and women of law enforcement and defending the rule of law.
Do you think those letters were the direct catalyst in getting this death warrant signed?
I mean,
I do.
I do. They helped. I don't think they hurt us, but
I think I had, like I said, I had probably about a good 5 or 6 letters going to him at the same time, and I was begging and pleading, and everybody told their side of the story and where they were at that time back in that day, and I think I was begging that he heard my story and reacted on it because he's such a believer in what he's doing.
Will, how likely, since the death warrant is signed, how likely will it be for more years before something happens? I mean, you've explained all these various appeals and obstruction. How do you think it's likely that it could be more years of appeals?
I mean, I think in light of my comments, I have very little faith in the criminal justice system. I think that should be pretty evident. But I do feel that we are at that stage now. There's nothing left to talk about. We're not talking about a mentally ill person. We're not talking about somebody who might be mentally deficient or innocent. This is a guilty man who's had due process on steroids. So I feel, but I would never, I told Mirtha earlier up in my office, I said, look, I'm not making any promises because I don't have that kind of faith in the system, but I feel that we are close, and we're certainly closer than we've been in 35 years.
What do you see needs to change so we don't have to go through 35 years of getting to where we should have come to?
Yeah, I think that is the crux of the question. There are 2 things, Angela, that we need to do to change. Number 1, if we're not going to do this in an efficient, just manner, have the courage to stand up and say we're no longer going to have the death penalty. But if you're going to have the death penalty, you cannot put these people through the pain and the torture that we do for 35 years. You can limit appeals. You can limit times on appeals. Watch now. We're on a tight timeline. This matter must be resolved in the next 32 days. That's come straight down from the Florida Supreme Court. So the courts have the ability, and the legislature has the ability, to narrow the scope of what can be done. We've got to cut down on the gamesmanship. The games played by the abolitionist movement against the death penalty are outrageous. A recent case tried here in my office saw a defense team that hired over 8 mental health experts, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on nonsense. That's got to be reined in. We need some sanity in this system, or give it up.
Jack.
You see a lot of these cases getting delayed through the appeals process and through other channels. Why do you think that is? Because it seems like they're just delaying the inevitable, and that a lot of these seem to be games, in your words. Why do you think they keep delaying?
Let me ask you a question. You're sitting on death row. What's the one thing you want more than anything? Time. You want time. And that's what your counsel wants to give you. And so they engage in these dilatory tactics of delay, delay, delay. There's delays on the front end. We're now seeing on occasion it takes us 4 to 5 years to get a case to trial. Danny's case was brought to trial within 9 months. There's no reason that can't be done. Either we need to start spending the money to expedite this process, or as I said to Angela, we need to give it up.
Just one logistics question. Do you know if he's had a scheduled appeal yet, either with the Florida Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court?
No, the next step in the process is, and again, the Attorney General's office is, we're kind of in a support role with them at this stage. What happens next is he will file a belated post-conviction appeal challenging all of the things that have previously been challenged. We'll go to the judge, we'll say there's nothing new here, nothing's changed. The court will issue a ruling that will directly go to the Florida Supreme Court. That's going to happen. The court here has to be done with this matter by the 12th of February. So today's the 31st. You got 12 days left.
Florida had a record number of executions last year. Do you think it's the goal? And we already have 2 on the docket for this year. You say you're working on a third in Indian River County. Is it the goal of your office and the Attorney General to kind of expedite these processes so more families can finally get closure?
Yeah, it absolutely is our goal, is the goal of all prosecutors across the state of Florida to expedite these cases, to move. Look, I understand. Human life is at stake. We want to make sure we get it right. But I can assure you that the due process built into this system and the checks and the balances are incredible. I mean, this doesn't happen in North Korea or in China or in the former Soviet Union, right? So there is incredible due process provided these people, but that doesn't mean we should take 35 years to get it done. That is literally the very definition of insanity.
When you mentioned this case has got to be finished, or the oral arguments and stuff in the next month or so, will that stuff happen here, like in the courthouse? Right
Yes,
here?
it'll happen right down the street in the courthouse here in St. Lucie County.
Okay. Jack.
What's your message to other loved ones of people who have passed away and now, they're waiting for similar outcomes in order for death warrants? What's your message to those people?
What I just said to Mirtha to you is what I've said to countless victims in the 34 years that I've been doing this. There's something wrong. This is not to live under this cloud, to have to bear the weight of this type of burden for 35 years. You want to talk about cruel and unusual? That's cruel and unusual. So my message to them is, I'm sorry. I really am. I'm sorry. And remember that when you vote.
How confident are you that this will happen this time?
Well, you see, that's kind of a different variation of the same. I mean, I'm not in the. I'm optimistic. I'm not the most positive I'm not the most positive person on the planet, and my wife will attest to that. But I'm pretty optimistic. Okay. Thank you all. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for the, but we did all right, huh?